Listeners, growing up, I remember hearing whispers about the how the stars had something to say about our lives. We all have had family members when anything goes wrong, we run to an astrologer and ask about how can we bridge the gap or what different remedies can we do to manage those things. And coming from a Hindu family and from India, it's more or less a regular, happening in any of our houses. And we all have seen different remedies being implemented time now and then. And we have found the results as well. Today, we have Molly with us to dive deeper into this fascinating conversation. Molly is an astrologer, herbalist, body worker, and guide with over a decade of experience. Her journey with astrology began alongside academic studies in psychology and philosophy at Boston College. Over time, she has worked with clients fascinated by the precision and practical application of astrology, from self development to career, relationships, and of course, health. Molly has been a beacon for many in finding their dharma or their higher purpose in life. Welcome, Molly, to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Molly, why don't you share your journey and introduce yourself to the listeners?
So people always ask me, how did you get into astrology? And first, I was initially really interested in psychology. And I studied, as you mentioned, psychology and philosophy in school. And one of my first jobs after school was in a research lab at University of Pennsylvania for addiction. And we would use MRIs and look at the brain waves of people who were suffering with various addictions to substances. And at that time, I had a lot of access to the databases, the archives, the library at the university. And I was in my lunch breaks, on my off time, I would read all these texts, and I was getting really into herbs and holistic healing. I got a little jaded working there because the studies that got funded were all drugs. And I thought, well, why would we be giving people who are already struggling with substance more chemicals in their body? And we had one study that was a mindfulness-based study where we would basically prescribe meditation to the people. But unfortunately, that study stopped being funded. And I thought it was like really what fueled my interest in holistic health. And I was also at that time struggling with really bad chronic acne from being on antibiotics most of my life, teenage years, to actually ironically prevent acne. And so I was getting really into the idea that herbs, plants and different foods can really heal us, like just the very basic fundamentals. Instead of adding chemicals, just really supplying our body with all the nutrients it needs. And then I was finding these texts in the library that were like Nicholas Culpeper, these Renaissance astrologers and doctors. And I was like, whoa, back in the day, I was already kind of interested in astrology, but I was like, whoa, they gave every plant a planet ruler. And every body organ system had a planetary ruler. And I was learning about even the skin and Capricorn. I have a lot of Capricorn in my chart. And wow, I'm having this chronic skin issue and connecting it to my birth chart and understanding that every herb, every food has a planetary correspondence. And really, when we bring in this holistic map, because I don't think astrology replaces medical profession at all, but it's really kind of a diagnostic tool and something we can look deeper at what is the root of the imbalance in the body. And the ancients knew this, and herbal medicine is elemental and astrology is elemental. So it's this basic kind of holistic framework we can use to get to like the root of an issue. And I happen to be able to like heal my skin through herbs and dietary changes. And so I was really amazed. And that really fueled my interest into like really becoming an astrologer.
Amazing. That's really fascinating journey that you have had over there. But help me understand, Molly. Astrology is something more or less, so far as my understanding serves me, just the interpretation of the positioning of different planets and stars at any given point of time. And basis that, a lot of deductions are made about a person's life out there.
Mhm.
Now, how can the planetary positions really be impacting a human's health out there? I know that with the movement of moon, there's a high tide and a low tide, and a lot of mood swings happen according to that as well. I've heard stories around that. Now, how does it reverberate across different planetary positions, and how can somebody, really dive deep to get a better understanding of their health patterns?
Well, the example you gave is beautiful because one of the most obvious things that show we are bioelectric, organisms is the moon and the tides. But the more obvious one is just night and day and the seasons. We know that the movement of the planets affect biology here on Earth, so it kind of goes to figure that if we can we tend to think of ourselves as a different category humans, but we are kind of just complex, creatures of Earth. And plants, bloom in different seasons and need different amounts of light or vitamins, and us too. And so it's really the idea that, and the ancients were more in touch with this, but we are cyclical beings. And, depending on the time of year we're born, the sun was at a certain position in the sky, and we require different nutrient levels than someone born at a different time of the year. And so astrology essentially, there's not a lot of people studying the how, right, it works,
Mhm.
but that's many sciences. We understand the theories, but we don't exactly understand the mechanism of action. But I would say that there is, there's a growing body of research that I think we're adding to, like cosmobiology, and there's Eberton Reinhold is one of the authors or people who did this, where they're really looking at the statistics and empirical data of certain planetary positions and certain planets moving through parts of the sky and how that impacts biological life here on Earth. And so the idea is, yeah, depending on the time of year, and the sun being maybe the most obvious indicator of health, it's the sun represents our vitality and our life force, our chi, our prana, whatever you want to call it across cultures, because the sun is the corresponds to the heart and the body, that battery that kind of regulates all of our energy. And you could say the moon is like the distributing force of the energy, the dispersing force. And it's also our mind. And we know the mind and body have a huge connection. So astrology is really kind of getting to the like interconnectedness of every part of our being, rather than viewing everything as separate and mechanistic. I mean, there's mechanistic things going on, but they're very interconnected.
So let's say if somebody was supposed to start using astrology for, the benefit of their health or for a better health out there, what would be the very first step out there? And if we talk about the Kundali, the chart that we create using the date and time, the planetary positions, everybody in India has very easy access to it. I'm not sure about the United States out there,
Mhm.
but for us, anything and everything that happens in our lives, we first go and consult a priest or an astrologer who can read those charts and tell us. Uh, so having an access to the charts is not a concern, and a lot of online tools are also available. But how to read those charts and what to
Mhm.
look for in those charts, if you can guide us.
Yeah. Yes. So astrology is a vast language, and you do eventually want to kind of learn that it's a study of correspondences. So understanding, the basic signs and the basic planetary meanings and what kind of body parts they relate to can be very helpful. If you're having something going on with like your stomach, for instance, you would want to definitely look at what's going on with the moon. And it's interesting, right? The moon represents in the physical body the stomach, but it's also the mind. And we know the stomach and minds, through science, are very interconnected. And a lot of the modern health research is showing our digestion greatly impacts the chemicals in our brain, like serotonin, all that stuff. And if you have a parasite, right, parasites feed off serotonin, and that can actually cause depression. So the mind, the stomach and mind link, the brain gut barrier, you could say, that's becoming more and more known. So just as to simplify it, of course, this is going to be very simple. Just looking at where your sun is in your chart, like what house it is in and what sign. And there are certain signs, that planets are exalted in, or they perform more naturally, let's say. So the sun is exalted in Aries. It's the peak of in Western world. It's Western astrology. It's seasonal based astrology. It's the peak of spring, and they say whenever the sun is in Aries is the best time to harvest medicines, right? Because the vital force in the plant is at its strongest. So people who are Aries sun naturally have a very strong vitality. And then you add to that understanding of, well, what house is the sun in? And the sun performs with more ease in certain houses of the chart. So areas of the sky the sun was in, those born around noon when the vital force was strong tend to have a more robust vitality. And we can think about just fire signs in general. They might spend their vital force more quickly than an earth sign. There's actually been studies that show, I don't remember all the studies because I do a lot of research, but there have been studies that someone was researching all these people that lived past 80 and looking at their birth, just their sun signs, and a lot of them were Taurus sun sign. And Taurus is that fixed earth, so they don't spend their vital force quite as quickly, as rapidly, right? And the mutable signs, Sag, Gemini, Pisces, Virgo, tend to kind of spend their vital force more quickly, right? Because they're kind of that like very adaptable bridge between the seasons, at least in the kind of Western understanding of the zodiac. But essentially, you would look at like your sun for your vitality, your vital force. What house is the sun in your chart? If you're having a specific ailment, it's really helpful to look at what planet rules that body part. And then how is it doing? Is it receiving a challenging transit? Because then you might be able to tell, okay, this could be a more short-term thing going on. Or is it something kind of more constitutional within your in your chart? And then it would be helpful because then you know to kind of strengthen that organ system. You know what, and then by correspondence, what foods would support that organ system? What yogic postures? What even mantras, right? You could use to strengthen that part of you. And then in this way, it's not like sometimes we have a symptom, but the root is not always what we expect, right? Based on what the symptom is. And so I view astrology, again, it's not a replacement for medicine, and I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a licensed doc physician. So I just want to put that out there as a disclaimer. But it helps us kind of like understand the deeper underpinnings of what's going on with that person.
The world of astrology is highly enigmatic out there. There are a lot of mysteries to be unfolded. A lot, though has been written in the scriptures out there, but the right understanding or deduction of those scriptures, I guess, is yet to be unfolded to its complete extent. And you talked about moon being responsible for our stomach majorly, and I totally agree on that. Whenever I have a stressful or anxious day, I have a little bit of indigestion issues. I have, really found that, and the gut and the mind are related. But coming on to something, that happens on a very regular, day-to-day, things that are shared by the astrologers, a lot of mindful stress is often linked with the Rahu and Ketu planets. I hope you are able to get the Hindi words for those. So how can you now, at one point you're talking about mental health also being linked to moon as one of the planets. Now what can you guide us through with this Rahu and Ketu deduction as well?
Rahu and Ketu. Sure. Yeah. I can speak through my own personal experience. I have my moon conjunct Rahu and Saturn in my
Okay.
chart, which is considered to be pretty challenging. And I do attribute like the many years I struggled with skin stuff to perhaps having that kind of underlying predisposition, you could say. So
Hmm.
Rahu is interesting because in health, Rahu actually rules over herbal healing and anything that's very like on the cutting edge. So yeah, more kind of you could say, yeah, like holistic medicines. But it can also create kind of a restlessness and instability in the mind, an imbalance, right, in the mind, because it's the head of the dragon with no body. And so Rahu, it's like that, you know, you could say like I feel like the Western world's very like Rahu driven, right? It's like desires. I want to get what I want at any means possible. But it can drive, innovation and technology, but it can also create imbalance. And we actually have a Rahu Saturn conjunction happening this year. And these
Okay.
mark periods where they say there's excess vata in the collective. And so it's like this, we have all this technological stuff, waves that are coming at us that can impact our biological rhythms and keep us awake at night. And you could say Rahu can create that kind of restlessness and instability of the mind, that excess vata K2 is kind of it can show it's in a metaphysical sense, they say K2 is where we surrender, where we let go, where we release in a sense. And so K2 can maybe show where we have deficiencies. You could say Rahu might be where we have excess, and then K2 could be where we have deficiencies. And then, knowing if we have certain very personal planets conjunct those nodes of the moon, because that's what they are, they're just angular kind of positions in the sky, but they're very fated and karmic points, especially in Vedic astrology. And so, um, if we're having transits to our natal Rahu or Ketu, or we have really close activations with personal planets in our chart, that's like another level of interpretation. And then different remedies you can bring in for that. But yeah, I would say for my own experience, I think having a Rahu moon conjunction with Saturn, it gave me a lot of challenge with my skin, right? Saturn does rule over all the like kind of the skin of the body too. And I had, yeah, years and years of like, you wouldn't recognize me. I looked very different. And it created a lot of mental anguish. And that can be the thing. Sometimes a health problem has its roots more in mindset than perhaps being just like something going on with our body or our organism itself, if that makes sense. And vice versa. Sometimes a physical health problem can create mental health issues as well.
I agree.
They're effects.
So some of the remedies, if you like to share about somebody going through a, tough period because of a Rahu or Ketu or, these planets. So what would be some of the remedies you would like to suggest?
Well, as a person in my Rahu Dasha, I do mantras for Rahu. I chant Rahu mantras. Um, what else? I'm trying to think. Meditation, right? Because that kind of higher expression of Rahu would be, controlling the mind, so it's not getting like carried away. Breath work, pranayama could be very helpful, where we're slowing down the thoughts, right? Because Rahu can lead to like racing thoughts or this kind of anxiousness, right? And so anything that we're kind of slowing the thoughts, relaxing the mind, calming the body, all those things can be very helpful.
I relate with all of these things at one place, but it's, even listening to you right now, I am astonished and surprised with some of the elements that are coming out. That how can these planetary positions really impact our health so much in depth, and most of us are just clueless about it.
The other thing I would say, because Rahu rules over kind of the technological innovations, and as I mentioned, EMFs are something we don't really know how that's affecting us biologically. I talk to a lot of people nowadays, friends, even clients, who talk about how they have trouble sleeping, right? And astrology, it's the science of light, right? And these like magnetic waves. And we're getting blasted, right? 24/7 now. Like most of us sleep with the phone near our bed for an alarm. We're on our computers all day. And we're not really like, I think hopefully more studies or research will come out about this, but we don't really know how it's affecting our biology. Um,
Agree.
like it's these waves that we're absorbing. And so I think being in this kind of Rahu period too, where in April we have this major Rahu Saturn conjunction, grounding is very key. And if we think of Rahu, he's like the head with no body. So what would be the antidote? Literally being in our bodies, right? When we're in our when we're on the computer, I know for myself, sometimes I forget to breathe. I'll just be working or I forget it. But if we could take our shoes off and just walk outside for 10 minutes a day even, and get those ions from the earth and ground our electric body, I think that can be another really beneficial thing in this kind of Rahu accelerated timeline that we're on.
Wow, that's an amazing tip. I totally agree. Even for me, I have been told about the Rahu Dasha out there, and the chanting, it really helps. I have seen a drastic difference coming, in my life in last 6 months since I've started regularly chanting. The next step I'm taking for myself is going for meditation. So probably I did start in between, but I was not able to really channel my energy well. So I've reached out to a guru and just waiting for her to get free and probably then start under her guidance my meditation journey. So that's something I'm really looking forward to in this month, February. And I totally agree that the technological advancements that are coming in and the overload of EMF that we have today, it's really impacting our brains and the overall biological development that's happening. And with AI now coming into picture, uh, I'm seeing a lot of decline in the cognitive abilities as well. Like even
Mm.
I'm a writer by hobby, by profession, whatever, by everything. So writing is something that really give quenches my famished emotions out there. So I really need to write and express myself. But since the advent of ChatGPT, though earlier I was really reluctant to use it, because being a writer, I want everything to be unique, coming through my own thoughts. But now, as a professional, when I have to serve my clients out there, I often have to now evolve with the technology as well. I cannot be taking 3 days when my competitor is giving the same thing in just 5 minutes. So
Ah, interesting point.
you have to evolve, you have to adapt to the technologies that are coming in. Uh, but now what I have observed is since last 1 year, when I've actively started using ChatGPT, learning its power, at times you can probably say laziness, but instead of putting that creative effort to write it on my own, I often resort to ChatGPT and then I make some little bit of tidbit changes to the text that comes out and then pass it forward. And at times, depending on the available bandwidth as well, things are accordingly written. But majorly, a lot of dependencies have come on ChatGPT, which I believe for us, we have developed our brains to an extent so that that level of decline, I'm not, I believe will not be there in our generation, but the generations to come, they're not even putting that much of effort. They're just directly giving inputs to ChatGPT and things are coming out. So, what are your observations to be happening in next 5 or 6 years? Because as we are moving forward, these technological advancements are only going to grow.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
how do you relate it with the current, as you were mentioning that April is going to be a very important period for Rahu acceleration. So if you can
Hmm.
just relate it with astrology and Rahu on this and help
Hmm.
us understand.
Well, there's going to be another kind of wave of technology. When we had Rahu Saturn in the 90s, we had the World Wide Web released. That was
Yep,
under Rahu Saturn conjunction. And then there was this whole emergence of internet and
yep,
internet technology. So we're going to have another wave of that. And I like to think, my optimism is that it's hard to say for younger generations. I agree because it's like we just don't know. But my optimism is that, yeah, we will kind of evolve with it, instead of it kind of replacing us or handicapping us, that we use it as a tool, right? So I think it's a lot about our intention with how we're using it, and just making sure that we're also connecting with our biological selves, like connecting with the natural world too. One of my friends talks about how she's very scared that people will stop having craftsmanship, that craftsmanship will die, right? The idea of people that have these like very ancient crafts that they practice. But I kind of disagree because, she was sharing this. It was funny. She made this comment sharing a video of this guy in Japan making these like pottery pots from like the clay to the glaze, and it shows all the steps. And she's like, I'm worried this is going to go away. But I'm like, in my head, I thought, well, it's kind of funny because now we know more about it because we can watch this video. So I think it all kind of balances because, we are still humans, we're not robots yet. So there's still we're using the technology to kind of share our humanness. And I get excited because I actually think this new emergence of technology helps us share antiquated things like astrology, like where we can used to think maybe, oh, it's woo-woo or spiritual, but maybe now we'll actually have more databases to prove the science side of it. Um, so to me, it kind of excites me because we can share information more readily. And in that way, maybe we can preserve certain things through that knowledge sharing, you know, those traditions or those things. So I don't feel like it's all or none. I think a lot of people get scared. They're like my friend, she was like, well, are we gonna just lose all these old crafts? Are we gonna not have craftspeople anymore? But who knows? Maybe it will inspire a whole new generation of people that find that thing that they might not have been exposed to otherwise and want to learn it. But, we'll probably have both extremes.
I guess it's gonna coexist together, where we might have
Exactly.
both the extremes, as you rightly put across. Uh, Molly, help me understand now. You say that with chalking out or charting out the planetary positions, we can know our health patterns. Um, how can knowing the birth charts at the when a baby is born out there, a new life comes into this world. What's
Hmm.
how can birth charts really help in navigating a healthier life for that baby? And why don't people really go for it? If astrology is helping us understand our health patterns and what changes we need to do, why don't people at the start of every year go to the astrologer, get things chalked out? Okay, these are the possible situations you might be in throughout the year. So
Yeah.
take proper precautions. Why things are not happening in that manner?
That's a great point. I think it's a combination of factors. I think sometimes people actually fear astrology. There's fear involved, especially with medical astrology. When I'd be studying, there's a lot of like kind of staple medical books. One of them is by Cornell, and it's like the Encyclopedia of Medical Astrology. So it has all these like health issues and the corresponding planetary positions. And so I feel, and I felt this when I started to study it. It can be scary, right? Because you're reading about potentials and most of it is talking about diseases or imbalances. And I think a lot of us, we don't want to look at that until we already are having an issue. Though I agree, I think the real beauty of astrology and why I love it is it can empower us to be preventative, to be like, okay, here's my like underlying what I'm working with, just like we have certain things that were determined through our genetics. Our astrology is almost like another DNA. And then it can show us, okay, I think certain personalities might get excited about that and want to be preventative. And then it could also bring fear, or some people think, oh, well, I don't want to manifest that through, there's a lot of different perspectives on that. So I think that could be one factor. People might be scared, or they just don't think it's valid, or they don't think it has anything to do with health. They might just think health is more just random. But for me, they're very related. And when you look at a chart, you can kind of tell the person's basic constitution. We're just looking at the understanding, like Ayurveda does this so beautifully, that someone who has a lot of fire in their chart. I have a lot of fire in my Vedic chart. They have more pitta, they might spend the vital force faster, and they might need certain things to just bring their body into balance, like a baby that's crying and is really red and hot. Literally just putting that baby in some like cooling water, giving it some cooling energy, it's just kind of, to me, it's like knowing what things to bring into the environment of that child or person that will help bring them into balance. And Ayurveda, really, it's all about the nutrition and the lifestyle practices. So it doesn't have to be scary. It can be something that we embrace as a preventative, so we can be the healthiest. And and it's recognizing that we're all unique. What you might need is different than what I'll need.
But you also deal with herbs on a daily basis. So can you share some instances where, with the reading of birth charts, you have helped yourself or the individuals who come to you, bringing your knowledge of herbs together with astrology? So if you can share some instances around that.
Yeah, so one really interesting area of study is the cell salts, and the idea that people born under certain sun or moon signs are use up more of the cell salts in the body. And the cell salts are the 12 kind of basic there's 12 basic ones of the things that when you burn a human body, the materials that are left, the salts that are left. And each herb, like herbs are different, have different amounts of those cell salts, same with foods. So knowing, what the symptom is, and then the corresponding cell salt, take this herb with joint or bone stuff, you can bring in an herb like horsetail. If someone's having, uh, say they're having a stomach stuff, right? A stomach issue, an herb like a slippery elm. It's a moon ruled herb that helps create a demulcent effect in the stomach. So it's understanding the person's elemental nature, what the herb would be to kind of pacify whatever imbalance is going on, and then, incorporating that into the diet.
Let's say somebody comes to you. So, what are the first steps? How do you help people? What's the path you navigate with them? And how do you build onto your combined knowledge of herbs, astrology, and various other modalities that you have, empowered yourself with?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of it is just like in my own life, like under helping me like understand what things to kind of go to rather than needing to go to a doctor all the time. So that's why I kind of learned herbs. I was really more just so I could be a healthy. And with people, sometimes people don't come to me for health stuff, they might come to me more of an emotional thing, but the chart can help me understand if maybe there could be a herb, a tea they could start drinking that might support whatever emotional imbalance. Like for example, someone might come and they're having a lot of stress or anxiety, and Uranus, the planet Uranus is making a hard aspect to their moon. And then you can see, and that's a long transit because Uranus moves really slowly. And then you would just kind of support them by saying, like, in this time period, you might feel more restless and you might need more of these tools to kind of counterbalance that anxiety, heightened energy, instability in your kind of focus or your mind. And then, in that way, it's helping them have a bigger picture of what's going on. And again, I don't replace, I'm not a physician, so I don't like advertise that, and I don't necessarily do health readings. But to me, knowing astrology is just, it's connected to everything else. And so when you look at the chart, you're kind of getting to the root of everything that's going on within the universe or cosmos of that being. And yes, different things, different topics can come up in the course of that exploration. And people are surprised, they think astrology is just psychological, right? Like, oh, it's just showing your personality traits. It's like, no, it's really showing like everything going on for you.
You mentioned that a lot of people do come to you about the emotional needs rather than the other physical problems that they might have.
Mhm.
Um, the today's era we are living in, everybody we look at, they are going through one or the other form of emotional problem, and specifically post-COVID, a lot of mental health acceptance has come into the our society, and the awareness has also been out there. People have started talking about it. There have been a lot of celebrities who have come out and open and shared about their own mental health problems, building that
Mhm.
awareness that's much needed. But help me understand, is it all about the planetary positioning out there with mental health issues being on such a rise out there? Uh, if I remember the statistics for the US correctly, I was because Anya Wellness also dealt with enabling mental health for people, helping them bridge those gaps. We were doing some research and we came across a statistic which talked about the period from April 2020 to June 2020. And the research was conducted in the same period in 2021. The number of cases in 2021 were double of what they were in 2020.
Mm.
So
Wow.
what the rise that we are seeing, and now even 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds are talking about depression, anxiety, stress. Probably when I was 10-year-old, I didn't even know the word at that time. I was more concerned about my Pokemon or Digimon cartoon that was coming on. With the such rise that's happening in the emotional health issues, how are planetary positions playing a role in it?
Well, I do. It's interesting because I didn't know 10-year-olds were depressed. That's interesting. I think with the rising, I mean, again, I think it connects to some of this Rahu stuff going on right now. It's like we're more connected than ever, but we're also more isolated than ever. So it's like it's this weird paradox where we have so much interconnection, and then we can also compare our lives with other people, right? Because we can see, social media. So I do think a lot of that has a lot to do with the technology and social media, if I'm completely honest, and that's just my own theory about it. Whereas we might be more naturally content if we just kind of lived in our own little neighborhood and had our friends we played with, and weren't like exposed to, we're exposed to so much information. And were we ever really designed to be inundated with so much news and uh just like images and stimulation? Like, I don't know. And you could argue that's creating a dopamine kind of burnout in a lot of people. Because we're constantly inundated with stimulation, that then our natural dopamine levels are going out of whack, and then our sleep cycles are affected. So I would honestly think it has a lot to do with that, because that's the major thing that's kind of maybe changed from when you and I were, in our 10 or 11 years old versus the children and generations now.
Understood. Understood. And I do
Yeah.
agree on that. There has been a overload of content and easy accessibility that has come to the children today. Uh, I believe that children today are born with mobile in their hands. Uh,
Mhm.
the very first thing any child you would see having is a mobile, watching different YouTube channels or Instagram channels. So I totally agree. I totally agree on that. But this just makes me curious, further, Molly, to understand. Not everybody's birth charts are going to be same. Not everybody's planetary positions are same. Even if two people are born at the same time on the same day, still they have a little bit of difference happening and their life paths are totally different. But why do we have so much of emotional chaos and happening in the minds of everyone, especially in the corporate world? If we go, be it a junior level employee or a senior level employee, everybody is going through so much of stress today. So
Yes. Yeah.
how is now, if I talk about the two, three planets that we have discussed, during our conversation, it's the moon, Rahu, and Ketu. How these three planets, or if any other planet, has a role to play, or can we find some similarities across the birth charts globally that's bringing so much of emotional chaos?
Right. Well, to answer your question, I would say it's not so much that like, oh, we all have something in the birth charts, but then we would really talk about the mundane astrology, is what they call it. The idea of the planetary positions, the transits that are happening just collectively that impact us all, regardless of our own natal birth chart. Um, so there's certain, I would do these monthly forecasts where I talk about days of intensity and days of harmony based on the alignments of the planets. And a great, to understand what a transit is, it's the geometrical positions or of the planets in the sky. We just had a stellium where a lot of them were all in the same sign.
Yep.
And that's why everyone was saying, oh, there's this planetary lineup. And it's not that rare. We have stelliums every, so often. But you could say they call those stelliums karmic knots. And so I think if we're having a stellium, we're at this kind of, and this year particularly, we have a lot of the planets moving into new signs. And um, like I said, I think that Rahu Saturn conjunction is a really big deal because it can create a lot of upheaval in the collective. And so, they say before a transit goes exact, and that transit will happen exact in April. Before, it's almost like a transit that's like a wave. Like as the planets come into their connection, a conjunction, they're applying, right? We call it an applying aspect, and then they go exact, and then it separates. So the plants are always moving, but when they come into certain configurations, you could say there's more intensity. And if we can think of all the planets coming together and lining up, that's a lot of energy that's getting amplified. And so it's fascinating because it's like understanding then the vibe of the collective, and it's very useful, especially if you work with the public or you work, but most of us do, we work with people. It can give you a vibe, like say you have an event that day or a meeting, looking at the transits, you can use astrology software for this. Even what the moon is doing that day, when the moon's in a hard aspect to Pluto or Saturn or Mars, we can say it's going to be a more intense kind of energy. Um, versus if it's making a very nice trine to Venus or a trine to Jupiter, there it has a different tone. And um, there's been interesting research actually where a radio station was called RCA. It's in my book, not my book, I didn't write it, but one of my books I study called by Jansky. It's like Astrology of Nutrition. And he is a Western astrologer, but the book is a lot of like just very interesting philosophy of how astrology impacts health and the collective. But I thought it was so fascinating. These were a radio station, and they wanted to understand why certain days they'd have all this interference in the the waves, like the reception of their radio show. And he basically like they paid millions to some astronomers to try to figure it out because they were like, it must be something with like this the waves, the radio waves. And then finally, someone on the team who was into astrology, they was doing their own kind of research and connected it with planetary aspects going on in the sky. And he could predict very accurately with certain planetary aspects created the disruption of the waves. Um, so if we think we're all just kind of in this atmosphere and these planets are emanating and maybe interfering or creating flow, that can help us understand where we're all kind of in the same boat, regardless of our birth chart. Like, yes, we were born at a different moment in time, but where the planets are now is impacting us all collectively the same
Um,
way.
can you share some of the common misconceptions that surround astrology and the relation with health? So, what are some of the
Yeah.
misconceptions out there?
I mean, I think I don't know if there's a lot of misconceptions because I don't know if a lot of people know that they're so connected. Like a misconception would imply people know there's a correlation, but I mean, I know a lot of misconceptions around astrology. People oversimplify it. They think it's putting you in a box, like removing your free will, so to speak. That's a big one. Like people think, okay, well, if I kind of study this astrology, it's saying that I don't have any freedom or autonomy or sovereignty. And I disagree. I would say actually studying it is raising our consciousness, raising our awareness so that we can it's like to me, I say it's like taking all the boxes and unpacking them. It's actually showing us how complex and layered we are and understanding our nuance, our unique potency, our unique gifts too. And so I think it's a lot deeper than what people think.
Mm.
Especially if people were just exposed to like a sun sign horoscope, they're gonna think, oh, it's a pseudoscience. That's the other thing that people call it a pseudoscience, and that's my own personal belief that that's incorrect because you could argue a lot of the science we have is pseudoscience because it's all just theories, and there's people that are constantly not really understanding the mechanism of how the theory works, like gravity. Like we don't necessarily fully understand every aspect, but we just know it works. And so we've established it as a science, or a piece of science. So I would say that it's a pseudoscience is also a misconception. And I do think in the coming years, we're going to validate it more as a science with all the like databases, internet information that we have going on, information sharing. I think there will be, and you've probably noticed there's like a renaissance of astrology right now.
Molly, help me understand. Often it is said that we have been discussing about health and astrology. I was listening to a radio show probably now a year back, where it was said that if you start any new health-related habit on a Tuesday, you're more likely to be staying consistent and more disciplined with it, rather than you starting out on any other day of the week. So are there any other such, tips available around with astrology and health goals? Because,
Absolutely.
yeah, so if you can share those, because every new year, gyms receive a lot of membership. And by the 5th of every January, those memberships might have been paid, but gyms we find are completely empty. So if you can share some of
I
those,
love
people can become a little bit more disciplined.
Yeah, of course. I think that's great. And that's one of the cool things that I've studied is um, those recommendations, really, that the timing, right? Because astrology is really the study of time above all else. That yeah, certain timing is better for certain things. So one of the great things to keep in mind, especially if you're a person that you have to get like a surgery or like a very major medical thing, there's definitely better and worse times to do that. But to keep it super simple, they say if we're just going to track the moon, if you're wanting to add nutrition or tonify, like things that you need to assimilate or nutrify your body, they say from the new to the waxing moon, when the moon is waxing and growing,
Mhm.
it's better to kind of add things in to your diet, to your lifestyle. You're probably more likely, right, to stick with it. They even say with relationships, it's better if you're going on a first date that it's on the leading up to the full moon rather than the full moon to the new moon. which is the waning moon, right? So just very simple, because you don't have to be an astrologer to figure out the moon phase. We can all like Google it and even just start tracking I always tell people who want to learn astrology, just start tracking the moon, what sign it's in, and if it's waxing and waning, and just start making observations with your daily life. And if you like to journal, it can be a very easy way to learn the basics of astrology, or even, really connect to the gravity of it. So yeah, and then if you were going to detoxify, or say you want to do a fast, or say you want to do something where you're trying to purge the body of maybe you're doing cleanse or of any sort, you would want to do that then on a waning side of the moon of the month. So it's just understanding like what part of the month would be better for certain activities. Another thing is, yeah, if you're getting like a very big procedure, they always say to avoid when, Mercury is retrograde. There's more likely that it could have delays, or things could be there can be confusion, right? Because Mercury is communication and technical ability, right? So if Mercury is retrograde, it's usually not recommended that you undergo like a major thing if you can avoid it during the retrograde period. Obviously, we don't always have full control of these things. And I think that's another reason maybe people don't want to study it, because they think like, oh, it's too much to pay attention to. But, I would say it's better to know this and just have these kind of ideas, and then, again, be more preventative with things than be in a situation where you didn't know, and ignorance is not bliss, right? You didn't know, you weren't paying attention, and then that's usually when things, start not working for us. So yeah, that would be the big one. And that was like a big thing with timing, is knowing where the planets were. And believe it or not, the whole RX on the medicine bottles on pharmacies, there's a lot of debated theories about where this came from, but one is that the doctors of the Renaissance period, they all had to be astrologers. Like you were not allowed to be a doctor if you didn't know astrology. So they would put the RX on the prescription. Back then it would be for an herb or something. Now it's for pharmaceuticals, but they would put the RX because it would signify that that Mercury or maybe another planet was retrograde, and it was not a good time to do a medical procedure. So instead of the procedure, they would just give this kind of medicine
Okay.
rather than doing like a surgery.
Wow. Well, that's
Yeah.
a new theory that I got to know about today. Molly, can we discuss about some of the health tips around astrology that you like to give to some of the people who are undergoing with some of the prevalent, ailments in today's time? Uh,
Mhm.
the first one being stress and emotional health issues, anxiety, depression, and stress. So, what should these people be looking at, and what should be their first steps to remedy these things?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is familiarize yourself with your moon and your birth chart. Because as we mentioned at the beginning, the moon is our mind. It is what we need to feel supported. They say it's the mother as well. It's our primal kind of instinctual needs. It's actually, you could argue, more important than our sun sign in terms of our well-being of our mind, right? It's our emotional needs, it's our natural responses to the world. And some people and some children, it's great to look at the birth charts if you have children, just naturally have different needs, right? So like a person with an Aquarius moon is going to be a lot more mentally active and maybe a lot more stimulated, and that child might be more likely to be diagnosed ADHD or something. But it could just be that they have this kind of more energy in their mind, and then understanding, well, maybe they need to kind of mentally kind of exhaust themselves a little more than someone who doesn't have that moon sign. Or maybe they do need to have a lot of different things or projects that they're working on, like that's supportive for that child or person. So yeah, looking at the sign that your moon is in, any planets that might be conjunct like with the moon are gonna flavor, because the moon is the body that receives and absorbs whatever it's kind of around it, right? It amplifies the light of the sun. So any planet that's around the moon is gonna flavor it. And I would say that would be a very good thing to pay attention to, because then you not only get a tone of like what the imbalance might be there. Like someone with Uranus conjunct their moon or opposing the moon, and they have an air moon, they're going to be more like energized in the mind, and they might need more things that support the nervous system, right? Think like herbs that kind of calm the nervous system down. They might need, it might be good for them to read a book at bed rather than being on a device. They might want to limit how much they're on devices, because they're naturally going to have a more sensitized constitution versus someone else who, might have an earth moon and be a little more, maybe they're just slower or they're more they're more naturally grounded, but they need something to kind of give them a little more energy. Maybe some exercises they can do to kind of get their energy up in the morning if they might wake up and be tired naturally. So yeah, knowing the moon, I would say, is like one of the just fundamental things of like, and most people, they know their sun sign because they know their birth month, but not a lot of people readily know their moon sign. And I would say that's arguably more important. And then also your rising sign. What was on the rise the moment you were born? It's the most personal angle in the entire chart and has a lot to do with our physical body, our morphology, you could say. Like you can often, as an astrologer, people will be like, oh, guess my sign. And I usually guess their rising sign because it's how they look, right? It's how their form is.
I'm going to be holding on to two questions. I'm going to come back to those. So the next ailment I would like to discuss on is people going through cardiovascular issues, hypertension, and other cholesterol issues and all those so related to cardiovascular. So what would be your suggestions to them?
Yeah, well, the cardiovascular is obviously the heart, right? And so it's the sun, that like regulator of the body that's um yeah, circulating all the energy, right, throughout the rest of the body. So probably things to strengthen the sun, things like things that support the solar plexus as well, because that would be like the chakra that connects to the sun in the body. There could be yoga postures that you do that support that. Obviously, movement, right? Regular exercise to get that battery kind of like running, smoothly operating. Back in the day, they used to put gold, like a piece of gold on the heart. There could be stones or gems that you wear that support the cardiovascular system. Solar gems, things, gems that are ruled by the sun, herbs that are ruled by the sun could be something that I would look at in that case.
And the final element, another major prevalent issue is weight loss. So what would be your suggestions to people who are looking to lose weight?
That one's a lot of that's around, to be honest, nutrition, but I think the even more easy that most people can implement, intermittent fasting. So where you have a window, like a 12-hour window that you're just not eating. And pe many people will lose weight just from intermittent fasting because they argue you could eat whatever you want in the window. Of course, I would recommend still be healthy, eat more whole foods, eat more things that just are complete, like not processed foods, obviously. And make sure you're not eating oils that are like soy or these seed oils can be problematic. Not all seed oils. You don't want to lump it all in the category, but like canola oil isn't great. And sunflower seed oils are in a lot of packaged foods. Those there can be sneaky things and sugars that are in packaged foods. That's why just when you eat kind of more just meats and vegetables and just whole complete foods, Ayurveda obviously knows all about this. You're more naturally gonna just be at the weight you're meant to be at because you're not putting in all these extra things for your body to detoxify. And because a lot of times when we gain weight, it's almost like a retention because our body is trying to kind of like you know, detoxify and get rid of impurities. And then intermittent fasting, you can just naturally, eat as much as you want within that window. Say you wake up at 8 a.m. and, maybe you start eating at 10 a.m. Don't, maybe don't eat breakfast. That's a big thing. People think breakfast is really healthy. I would disagree. I never liked eating breakfast as a kid. And then as an adult, a lot of the science is coming out like you don't really need to be eating a big meal first thing in the morning. It's better to, meditate. And the Ayurvedic clock talks about this, how certain hours of the day are better for certain activities. So again, we're talking about the study of time here. So I think intermittent fasting is great, where you might not eat your first meal till 10 a.m., but then you would make sure that your last meal is within enough of a window that you have like a 12-hour of fasting, right? I forget the exact numbers, but you can Google like intermittent fasting schedule. And yeah, you can cater it to like when you wake up and when you go to bed. But the idea is like usually like past 6 p.m. at night, you don't really need to be eating. You know, your body is just trying to get rid of everything and process the foods and the day. And so if you're putting a lot in right before like you're about to go to sleep, one, it's going to make it harder to sleep. And then two, when your body should be cleansing and it's cleansing mode, it's like we're computers, right? We're giving it food and then it's not able to go into that cleansing and repair mode. So I think intermittent fasting is a great way of just tuning into like these natural rhythms that support our natural being. And you'd be surprised that like people would be surprised that you could just probably shed a lot of weight through that. And then of course exercise helps. But I would argue the diet is probably like the first thing to pay attention to. And before feeling like you have to eliminate a bunch of foods and deprive yourself, just stopping when you eat and controlling the feeding and fasting cycle.
But help me understand, Molly, if in the birth charts of a lot of people, it is said that you are going to be a little overweight. With the
Mhm.
regular diet and exercise, can those people really, falsify that birth chart reading out there? Or what would
Yeah.
be your inputs from an astrological point of view for people trying to lose weight?
Yeah. No, what you brought up is great because it shows we all have different kind of baselines. So I think, yeah, if you have more of a chart that, yeah, indicates potential for weight gain, um, it's just knowing that you might have to be more, I would say it's not like, I think we can overcome it. In other words, yeah, there's certain genetics that we can't change, of course. And I think our chart can be similar. Like they argue some of the fate in our chart is fixed. But the idea is whatever percentage, 30, however, we don't know the exact percentage that isn't, through awareness, we can mitigate or kind of correct that. So I don't think, I would never think, oh, well, that person's just destined to be unhealthy. Like I don't agree with that. I think they might have more weakness, susceptibility to certain weaknesses in their biology, but with that awareness, then they can make the necessary measures to counter that. And it might be more challenging for that person to lose weight potentially, but I don't think it's impossible.
Now, coming back to the questions, what I wanted to understand primarily, Molly, and you brought it up, like the moon signs are more important than the sun signs. But
Mhm.
what's the difference between the two, and how can I know? Because usually, as you also said that majorly we talk about the sun signs. I'm also aware
Mhm.
about the sun sign. I don't know what's my moon sign. So, what's the difference between the two, and how can I know my moon sign if I know my sun sign?
Yeah, well, you would need the birth chart to identify that, both the sun and the moon sign, the time of birth, the place of birth. You can use any astrology software. But are you basically asking the difference between the sun and the moon sign?
Yeah, the
Okay.
primary the difference.
Yeah, the sun is like the vitality, the life force, the prana, the chi. It's our personality on a psychological level. It's how we kind of like express our energy. And the moon, you could say, is how we like the vital force of the sun is distributed throughout the body. And it's also very much the more subtle kind of impulses, instincts, impressions of the mind that again, yeah, I do think they're more important because, we kind of project our personalities, but the moon shows what's going on kind of underneath the surface. And that's why with relationship astrology in Vedic astrology, the moon is the most important thing. They do this whole point system, as you probably know, just calculating one moon to the other. Because, you could say, oh, well, I'm an Aries and he's a Sagittarius, we'd be a great match. Not necessarily. If the moons are not in a nice relationship, or they don't have aspects from planets, then there can be a lot of clashes with that person because they're not going to get you on an emotional level. And in our health, the moon is very much how we nurture ourselves. So, an afflicted moon, I have an afflicted moon in my own birth chart. It can be more of a challenge to get the nutrients we need because we might just skip eating or we might not have those natural nurturing instincts, right? Again, it all goes back to the nurturing we received as babies. Sometimes if they say if the mom was under a lot of stress while she was pregnant, and when she gave birth and maybe she wasn't able to breastfeed fully, like in my case, that happened to me. That shows that usually that's kind of indicator of afflicted moon, right? Or some people, their mom wasn't even around at all, and then it feeds into how that person is able to then nourish themselves as an adult.
Molly, before we conclude, are there any specific transits that are happening in the planetary positions in this coming year that you would like people to be aware about, the listeners to be,
Yeah.
knowing?
Well, right now we have one I call it an accident alert, where Mercury is in a square to Uranus through the 11th of February. And so, unfortunately, we've seen these like major accidents in aviation, and some people are attributing that to Saturn and Aquarius as well. And I think it's crazy this week. We've seen so many kind of these like accident things. Mercury, when it's in a hard aspect to Uranus, can create accidents. It just can. And especially if it's aspecting a very personal thing in your chart. And so it's good to just take it slow, like especially now through the first, you know, 2 weeks or so of February, it's going to be in that square Mercury with Uranus. And so, yeah, just slowing down, like being more mindful when you're doing things. Maybe not the time. I always tell people it might not be the time to like take up that new crazy, adrenaline hobby when Mercury's in a hard aspect to Uranus. It's just not good, not as good a time for risk taking. Uh, and then, as I mentioned, the Saturn Rahu conjunction in April is big because that can create this kind of upheaval in the collective. Like, not to, and again, I never want to fearmonger, but there can be an agitation in the collective, and there's more wars fought during Saturn Rahu conjunctions. There's more technological advances. So it's not all bad, but that can be a very restless time for the psyches of people. And so, maybe taking some melatonin, taking or drinking teas at night that help calm you down so your rest isn't getting too messed with. Sleep is key, I think, throughout the spring, and we'll be feeling that pot of water coming to a boil. Um, yeah, those are kind of the big ones that I can think of in the near future.
Amazing, amazing. Molly, thanks a lot for such a wonderful episode. Any final message for our listeners?
I would say do not approach astrology from fear, approach it from a place of empowerment, knowing that it can give us these kind of underlying or hidden clues that we might not realize really have an effect on our everyday. And so, in that sense, knowing our chart can very much empower us to be the best versions of ourselves.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. And listeners, as we've explored today, astrology offers more than just predictions. It is a tool for deep self awareness, especially when it comes to our health. Astrology has been a tool for me as well to go and find some remedies in my own life. And as Molly said, don't approach it from a place of fear, but from the place of being empowered through it. And remember, we are listening. It's an anonymous mental health platform to help you navigate all your emotional stress and troubles. It's an anonymous platform. Come to the platform, vent out whatever you're feeling like, and we are there to support you. Thank you. Please stay tuned until our next episode. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you so much.